Welcome back to the channel, everybody. Today I have a pretty fun project for us. This is my first pedal board I ever made when I got into welding. It used to be a bed frame from my sister-in-law, so it was thin and it was not good results, as you can see, and these examples here close up. But today, I think it's about time to put it into retirement and make a new one where all of my connections can live safely underneath, won't have to worry about disconnections. I'm gonna do that using this YesWelder CT2050. Not only is it a TIG welder with pulse capabilities, it also is a plasma cutter with a built-in air compressor, which is very, very cool if you ask me. So I'm going to use this to cut out all the pieces of my pedal board. Then we're going to switch it up and weld with it using the pulse settings and make something I can be proud of. That's the goal. So let's get into it. Here I'm using a paint marker to give myself some nice thick lines that I can follow. Then it was time to outline all of the pedals and mark them out. We got our front, which is just going to be a basic strap. We got our back. We're going to put a 3/4 inch hole right there for our power to feed through. All of these pluses, that's going to be my input, and the circles, those are my outputs where they're located. And then these dashes are where the power is. And I made a little key right here. All my inputs and outputs, I'm going to be drilling a 3/8 inch hole. And then for my power, I'm going to be going back to the 3/4 inch hole. But pretty much I'm going to have my tuner, wireless pedal, my sonic maximizer, big muff. I'm going to have our soul food, carbon copy, and my looper down here. I did that because I use these three more than I use all of these. So I'm going to have my input here. I'm going to drill a 1 inch hole for these inputs to slide into. Our patch cables out of this kit. We've got our power block here that I'm going to be running lots of these little adapters to. I also have a chain that I'm going to be linking a couple of them together. Here I'm just pre-drilling all those holes with a 3/8 bit before I come back in with a step bit to make them larger. Now that that's out of the way, let's set up our plasma. We're going to have 12 amps to start, 0.5 upslope, hitting 25 amps at the max, a 0.5 downslope with 12 amps as the minimum again, with a 5-second post-flow, 1 second pre-flow, and then I stay in the 2T function so when I'm pressing the trigger, the plasma is working. Also check out the square tubing that I'm cutting along. This is what you call a fence. You set it up offset from your mark and drag along it and it will give you a straight line every time. Also make sure you do a couple dry runs to make sure you don't get caught up on anything in your cut path. I ended up switching to some flat bar instead because I was getting caught up on that square tubing. So that's another reason, always ensure you do a couple dry runs so you're not bumping into anything, throwing off your cut. Here I'm double checking that the top and bottom are close to the same size. And here I'm fixing the sides that I made 18 inches instead of 13 inches. Then I went back over everything to make sure I cleaned up all the plasma marks. Alright, so now we've got all of our pieces cleaned up, ready to go. We're ready to get this thing all packed up. I'm going to set up the machine here. I'm going to get this puppy set up for some pulse welding. 1 second pre-flow, 5 starting amps, 0.5 upslope, 66 max amps, 10 as our minimum, 3 pulses per second at 50% on each side with a 0.5 downslope to 5 amps and 5-second post flow. Trying to get these corners tacked up was really difficult for me actually, but I ended up using the top to give it some rigidity and it all kind of came together. So, as you can see, we started laying a bead down. We were going to blend these, but we have some bigger gaps here we're going to have to deal with. So that's where we're going to have to use some wire. We're going to just use wire all the way around. It's hard to tell, but we are pulse welding here. I just sped everything up because we have a ton of welding to get through. As you can see, I'm bouncing around making smaller welds, sometimes called stitch welds, to make sure I'm distributing the heat evenly and not warping that top. If I would have just made straight runs on each side, we would end up with a crumpled pedal board, and that wouldn't have been too much fun. Started running into these big gaps in the front, so I made smaller welds where I was filling more. When I got to the back, I actually ran across that edge with a grinder, as you can see, to give myself just a really tight fit up. Wasn't using quite as much filler on the back here. Back on the front, we're using lots of filler because we got a bigger gap. But that pulse welding actually helped a lot in this section because it wasn't getting too hot where I was constantly blowing holes. It'd be a good idea to go back through and clean all these welds before tying in, or else you're going to get things like this where you hit contamination spots. It's just not going to be super pretty, but we're blending it all in anyway. I went for a pretty long run here, and it ended up making us have a little bit of distortion on the face of the plate. As you can see, it kind of sink in here. But you can also see my heat affected zone is inconsistent on the front too. Last little bit of the top here, and then we're going to move on to the corners. All right, so we got it all welded together. Now I just got to go back over, blend these all together on the sides, and then it'll be time to start putting our hardware in there. So let's get to it. To knock these down really fast, I'm using the 3M Cubitron. It has this red pad that attaches right to your grinder, and you actually screw in pads to that backer, and it acts as the rigid disc. But instead of going through entire flap wheels or grinding wheels, all you gotta do is when that pad wears out, you just throw it away and put on another one. It really dug through this stuff quick. Big fan. Next came the never-ending task of soldering joints. I had a total of, I think, around 38 different solder joints, but this right here, I'm attaching one of the inputs to one of the jacks here, and it's gonna live on the right side here. But I just wanted to show a quick little bit of this process. It wasn't going too smoothly because I had to use my wood burning gun instead of my solder gun because my solder gun just would not work. That got pretty frustrating, so I called up my neighbor Jeff, went over to my favorite place called Linda's, and used his soldering gun. This is me connecting one of the right angle 1/4-inch connections. This red wire on top is going to be your hot, aka connected to your tip. And the other wire that you find that is not coated, that is going to be your ground, and you connect it to the sleeve. You got to crimp these little clamps on the back around your wire so you can slip over the insulation tube and the screw cap. This is the other style of connection that we have. It's called a pancake connector. It's so you can get your pedals nice and close together. I also did something called pre-soldering the wires here. So this left wire, which is our red or hot, that is going to our tip. And then the other wire is going to be going to our sleeve, which is your ground. Next thing to do is install the screws on the back plate. Then I just had to feed the wire over to the other connection point and put on the other side. I figured out here I messed up pretty bad. I definitely should not have soldered all of these joints and fed all of these through until I had this carpet on top, but we just went ahead and measured out the size that it needed to be, and I trimmed it down as best as I could, and then went and measured out where all of the holes were going to go through. This would have been way easier to just lay them out afterwards and drill them from the other side, but when you bite off more than you can chew, you just chew it. After cutting out all the holes, I started feeding all the connectors through, and of course finding a few here and there that I missed on the other side. Since I didn't have the exact measurements there that I wanted, I just went ahead and trimmed around the edges to give the board the look I wanted before I glued down the carpet. You also want to put a bunch of heavy stuff on top of it to clamp it. After everything was glued down, I plugged everything in and tested it real quick before I moved on to attaching the hinges. I picked up some stainless steel hinges over at Home Depot and tacked them on the back here. This proved to give me a lot more trouble than it should have, but we got them on there. Next, I attached them to the bottom side, just giving quick tacks on each side of the hinge. But I also, that same fence that I used to make straight cuts, I used it here to give a little bit of a distance so I didn't fry any of the cords inside. It provided a stable backing as I was pushing down on the back plate here. Put a little bit more of a weld on here to secure these down. Here I'm attaching right angles that I attached a nut to the back that are going to serve as the way I'm securing the bottom to this top piece. Once I had that done, I went through and I blended the front side of the bottom before adding the holes for the feet to go into. Here's a little bit of a look at the inside. So we've got where our feet stick in. This is how we secure it. So we got all of our power. One thing that I'm gonna probably upgrade later is gonna be this mini brick. Let's look at the inside. We're gonna attach these legs. And the legs was super simple. It was just a screw with a bolt that I found these little legs and just screwed them on down. Then it was time to tape up all my connections before giving it a nice camo paint job. Then it was time to untape all of those connections again and plug in all of the pedals again. The thing about all of these pedals being where they are on the board, they are not actually in line. A big thing that I wanted to do with this was have things for ease of access, so it didn't really matter where they were on the board because I could run it all underneath. One last thing to do. Let's give her a go. Make sure everything's working. We are good. All right, let's give her a test. I would say that works. This is a lot of fun. I'm going to play with my new toy. If you enjoyed this episode, let us know. Make sure to head on over to the Weld app. If you have any questions, drop them in there because we try to make videos that answer your questions. So until next time, we'll see you out there.